Brian, being in the low-code space, commonly I know people will ask you, what's the difference between low-code platforms and no-code platforms? Can you just help us understand kind of what those differences are?
There are no-code platforms and there are low-code platforms, and both have become enormously popular. There's a common idea in the software world that all software will eventually be built by what we call citizen developers, that non-developers should be able to build software. This has been sort of the holy grail of the software industry for a long time. And the concept has existed, and there's always been versions of what we would now call no-code and low-code software, but we seem to have entered into a unique moment where the tooling around software has just gotten to the point that it's so good now that we really are in a moment where these platforms can exist, where somebody can create their own software application without being a developer. So the difference between no code and low code, no code is what it says it is. There's literally no coding. So it is somebody who is not going to use any programming language to do it. Everything is drag and drop. Everything is visual. You're creating forms, you're pulling interfaces onto a canvas, and the result is working software. The idea of low code is that there may be some programming involved. Now you might say, well, obviously I want the no code. Why would I want to do programming? So we don't actually feel that way at ProcessMaker. We like to talk about both no code and low code, but we think there's a place for programming. So it really becomes more a question of governance. If you are not a developer, you do not want to see code, you do not want to be asked to write code, you do not want to have to look at code in your interface. However, there are moments where there are things that are better done with code. And so as long as that's in a segregated part of the tool where developers may be able to write and continue to build out the no-code tooling, then it's, in our opinion, something that's very much welcome. You want that in your tool. So no-code tools today still tend to solve slightly less sophisticated use cases. And when you have a more sophisticated use case, there is usually still a place where you're going to want the ability to potentially develop your own components and load those into the no-code interface and deliver them to your internal citizen developers. So again, it's they tend to exist together. At some points you're in a tool and you're working in the no-code interface. At other points you may say to a developer, here's a access for you, and I want you to go in and write a very specific function or a very specific piece of code to deliver some functionality inside the no-code tool set.
So Brian, you've talked a bit about citizen developer, and I'd love to hear just a little bit about what you think that idea persona is. What makes a really good citizen developer?
Citizen developer, and the idea of the citizen developer is a relatively new term. These terms kind of come out of, well, they generally are emerging from the analysts. The analysts are always trying to look at the market and put a label on it. As a developer of software, we don't usually think that way. We look at the problem and we just try and start solving problems. An analyst then comes along and says, oh, you're developing a low-code tool, you're developing a no-code tool, you're developing a citizen development tool set. A citizen developer, in this case, is somebody without specific specialized skill sets or specialized knowledge, especially in programming. But an ideal citizen developer will have a lot of logical constructs, and in our opinion, the ideal citizen developer is somebody who is an expert in a particular field. So in order to develop a great app, you have to first really have an extreme amount of empathy with the problem you're trying to solve. Ultimately, it's all about the problem you're trying to solve. Hopefully you've lived that problem, you have very specific experience in that problem, and you know exactly what you don't like about other software you use or is being used today to solve those problems. So in our opinion, that is the ideal citizen developer. They're also going to have, I love the term in higher education, they tend to use the term funky tech. It's somebody who has not been formally educated with a technical degree, is not a developer, but is not afraid of technology. So the constructs in ProcessMaker, when you are developing a workflow using our drag and drop designer, or developing a form using our drag and drop form designer, or connecting, pulling in an interface to connect to an external system, they are still system concepts. So you do have to have some level of comfort with systematic thinking. with understanding inputs and outputs, and what you're going to be capturing and what you hope to deliver, what you want to measure, so having an understanding of reporting, why you're building the app and what you're going to want to report on. So our ideal system developer is somebody very curious, somebody with specialized knowledge in an industry, somebody who likes to tinker really with developing solutions.
When enterprises are deploying low-code solutions, what kinds of things should they be thinking about in terms of governance?
Governance is really important for systems groups inside large enterprises. In fact, I would say it all boils down to governance. You end up in today's IT landscape as a large enterprise, you're going to end up with hundreds of applications. And that is really the great challenge of today for CIOs and system directors in organizations of any scale. And so when we talk about governance, we talk about when we take an application, when we accept that an application is being used in our enterprise, we want to have some concept of who's going to use it, what are they going to use it for, what kind of support are they going to need, what is the expectation, what kind of support are we getting from our vendor. So this concept of governance becomes really important because each application has its place. Inside ProcessMaker, we've set it up to make it very easy to manage governance also inside the application. So there's the concept of no code and low code, and those both exist inside ProcessMaker. And when we talk about low code, we it starts to enter in the persona of the developer versus the no code, which is the citizen developer. So we have to figure out how each of those personas is going to interact with the application. We have the users. We have those that are managing the process or came up with the process and developed it and are implementing it. So they need ways to deliver the documentation, deliver the training around that application. The developers only want to see the piece of the application that they're working in, and they need to know what they're delivering. What's the input, what's the output, and are they developing a component that's then being delivered to no-code developers? So inside our own application, we take governance as a very important part. Also, the security around passwords, APIs. How are those all going to be managed inside the solution? The great thing about ProcessMaker is anybody can develop applications, but at the same time, we put on guardrails, and that's I think a really important thing for CIOs to consider, because a CIO doesn't really want hundreds of developers developing in hundreds of different languages, developing in hundreds of different styles, and then potentially leaving the company. And then nobody really knows how it was built, how to re-engineer it, how it was worked. When you're building something in ProcessMaker, it's going to live within certain bounds, and those bounds give security to the enterprise that's taking it on, so that they know that they can maintain it over time, that other people will be able to understand it as they look at it. And just to give you an example, inside ProcessMaker, if I do want a developer to develop, we give them the flexibility of developing in any language they want to develop in. Java, JavaScript, Go, PHP, you name the language, we support it. So there's flexibility, but at the same time, when they develop in a IDE, an interface that is made for developers inside the tool, but what they develop then executes sort of in a box, in a protected box. It can't infect anything that is inside ProcessMaker. It is sandboxed. It can expand and use resources according to a different management system that we provide to the user. But at the same time, as we're giving them flexibility, they're also in this box with some guardrails. So it just makes it easier then to maintain over time. We know what versions and version control. There's a whole version and version control system, so they can manage that. All of these things have to be considered in this kind of a solution, because it's going to end up being deployed very widely, and you really want to make sure you understand how those assets are being used across the enterprise.